Hello, Stewart here from Drone Film Guide, the channel where we learn to fly like filmmakers, back with the MAVIC Air on the table. I just wanted to run through a couple of things here on the app just to give you a look at it, just in case you were considering buying this, because there's a few things that came as a bit of a surprise to us that we weren't completely aware of when we bought it. Namely that the course lock intelligent flight mode has been removed. We rather love course lock actually. We have a tutorial on it if you're remotely interested. Fantastic intelligent flight mode that is no longer on this drone. On the plus side, the focusing system has changed back to just infinite focus. There's no option to tap focus or any of that stuff that you have on the MAVIC Pro I should say. So that's good, you just don't need that on a wide angle field of view camera like is on the MAVIC Air here. So let's dig into it. And just to clarify, we bought this drone, we're not linked to DJI in any way. This was our own purchase. We bought it to replace our Phantom 4 because we believe it has equal performance but is much smaller, and therefore for what we do it will be quite practical. Right, let's crack on. Okay folks, so here we are inside the app. I've taken the MAVIC Air, put it elsewhere inside the living room. I didn't want it hissing on the microphone. This computer hissing away is bad enough. So you get a nice view of our living room there. Right, let's get straight into the camera settings. I should say this is not a review, this is not a best settings. We're going to do all that stuff later. I just want to give you some information here so you can really assess if this drone is capable for what you are looking for. Let's just go into all the picture settings first of all. This looks familiar. As you can see there, auto and manual exposure. You can change your ISO shutter when you're in manual, and you have exposure value compensation controls there when you're in auto. So that's all well and good, that stays the same. This is where things get a little bit different. Video size, because we're here in the UK, we have this on 25 frames per second 4K. Now here's a big one. I just wasted yesterday an hour and a half with DJI online support trying to figure out why I could only see 4K at 30 frames per second. It didn't even give me the option of 24 frames per second. Like, oh, you got to update your iPad, update this, that, the next thing, try a different device, etc, etc, etc. I'm sure it was all well-meaning advice, but it was all completely useless advice. Update the firmware on the MAVIC Air as soon as you get it. That solved all our problems. I was speculating that the information, the specification for the MAVIC Air was misleading on the internet and that we only got 30 frames per second like you do with the Spark, etc, etc, etc. Not true. Normally we don't advise updating firmware for this very reason, because DJI apps have a habit of forcing through changes that can crash your system, so we're not in tune with the idea of just updating our firmware instantly. But as soon as I updated the firmware on the drone itself, I was able to get all these picture modes and frame rates to be precise, which I couldn't get before. So yes, don't waste an hour and a half of your life doing that. Update the firmware on the drone. So as you can see, they're 24 frames per second, 25 frames per second, and 30 frames per second on 4K. On 2.7K, you get a whole bunch of frame rates. From our perspective, the most interesting being 50 frames per second for nice, smooth, slow motion. If you haven't seen our first look, our first impressions video of the MAVIC Air that we put out the day we got it a couple of days ago, take a look at that. You can see some slow motion footage. We were quite impressed with the 2.7K footage. Looks sharp and crisp and nice, and you have the option of slowing down 2 times essentially if you're converting into 25 frames per second. We're going to do some full picture profile analysis, upload some nice 4K footage in the next few days, so hang in there for that so we can really properly assess the picture quality of the drone. 1080p, you get frame rates all the way up to 120 frames per second. As you can see there, it's just clarifying for you that that is a slow motion mode. Our quick test showed that 120 frames per second is not really up to much, but I suppose let's keep in mind, as I keep saying with this thing, it's an inexpensive flying camera, so let's be realistic about what we can expect. You don't have the option of changing between PAL and NTSC like you did on some of the other drones. Normally came after the video size option there, but that's because all the frame rates are sitting there inside the video size option. Video format as before, MPV or MOV, that's fine. White balance as before. Style, Now this is, as before, standard, landscape, soft or custom. Again, we're really going to dig into this and see what the best results are, because what is a big change here for us is that we only have the options of D-Cine-like and normal here on the color profiles. If you haven't seen our big analysis of D-Cine-like versus D-Log, we came down in the favour of D-Cine-like. It's giving you ample dynamic range, flexibility in post. So we're quite excited to really dig into this D-Cine-like profile and see what we can get out of it, particularly given that the camera has 100 megabits per second bit rate. So with any luck, we'll get a bit more depth in the colours and we'll be able to pull a bit more detail out of the shadow and highlights. We're going to play around with that and get back to you. Our initial tests, for us, the colours were a little bit rich. We don't like going for that whole super flat thing and destroying the picture so you can fix it in post. We're not aiming to do that, but we want nothing that's too contrasty so that we do have some flexibility in post. But it's an important detail if you were enjoying having all the picture profiles and the various modes and color profiles that some of the other DJI drones have. If we go into settings here, we get the histogram as per usual. That's good, we like that. Smart arm LED lights, that's your options for turning the lights on and off when you want them on. Overexposure warning, there's a good example of that. You can see the blown out section on the wall there in the zebras. Video caption, I don't know what video caption does, I'll look into that. Grid, if you choose, you can have your rule of third grid lines, you can have your diagonals which can help with your composition. What else? File index mode, continuous, that's just a file number system for your SD card that goes inside the drone. Save unstitched panorama photos, fine if you want to actually save the raw material that make up the panorama and maybe do your own panorama and play around with that, might be worth doing. In fact, we have a tutorial on doing panoramas the old-fashioned way with a free piece of software that we found on the internet, so check that out because that might be quite useful actually. Storage location, this is a big one. The Mavic Air has internal storage of 8 gigabytes, which gave us about 11 minutes of recording time, I think it was. So not massive, but you know, it doesn't hurt. And there you can see there's 0.9 gigabytes left on the internal storage, and we've got 53.8 gigabytes left on a 64 gigabyte mini SD card that we have in there. So that's quite cool. Two options there. Format internal storage, reset camera settings. So there's all your picture mode options. Just a little bit different there. So something to keep in mind, particularly the color profiles. The other thing I wanted to show you here was if we go into the intelligent flight modes, we've got normal, quick shot, active track, smart capture so you can wave at the drone to control various cool features, tripod mode, which is one of the most interesting things for filmmakers to get some nice smooth steady shots, cinematic mode, same kind of idea, same kind of principle, tap fly, never used it, not sure why I would. Point of interest, love point of interest, fantastic tool for getting nice orbits around your subject. Notable in its absence is the course lock. We found course lock a very, very good intelligent flight mode. It was great for pulling off cinematic movements that you couldn't possibly achieve with manual control. I think I said in the intro, we have a video on it as well. Check that out if you're interested in course lock, because if course lock is very important to you, then this Mavic Air is limited in that respect. We're not too cut up about it because we have the active track, we have tripod mode. Most of the flying we do these days is with manual control, because after a good few years flying these things and getting nice control settings, I have the dexterity in my thumb to pull off some cool moves. But nonetheless, the absence of course lock is a little bit disappointing. Right, what else? Let's quickly go through the actual app itself so you can see the various menus. Pleasingly, actually, it's been quite simplified in comparison with some of the other apps, so it is a little bit more user-friendly. In the main controller settings, remote identification, I don't think we need too much of that just now. This is related to the controller, obviously. We'll come out of that. Basic settings, home point settings. Okay, well we can't. Oh no, we can set the current aircraft position as your home point for your failsafe, the point at which the drone returns if the failsafe is engaged. Fine, I'll leave that, cancel that, or not. Right, let's go back into it. Home point not recorded because we're inside and there's no GPS location. Fine. Multiple flight modes, well, you want that switched on so that you have access to your sports mode, should you want to do that. In the positioning mode, return to home altitude, you can set that as before. Beginner mode, you can switch that on and off, that's quite good. Useful thing for absolute beginners, controls the speed and distance you can fly with the drone. Set max flight altitude, well in the UK here we have it set to 120 meters because taking it above that would be illegal and irresponsible. Enable max flying distance, you will never see us do a range test with this drone because that is also illegal and irresponsible. Apologies for being the fun police on that one. We're not telling you what to do, we're just saying what we do. But you can set it if you just cannot resist the temptation to try and fly the thing past a certain distance. Much more interestingly than all of that, you still have full access to the EXP settings, which are tremendously important for having maneuverable manual control of the drone. We're going to do a video of that in more detail to help you understand why that's so important. Sensitivity and gain fall into that category as well. Sensors, well, you can just get an assessment there of whether the IMU needs calibrated. Let's not get bogged down in that. Compass, same for that as well. Should you be having problems, should the drone not be holding position when you're out flying. You can set your cinematic mode settings here. If you're in cinematic mode, remote controller signal lost, return to home. Okay, so you get the option of what you want the drone to do if the remote controller loses its signal. Return to home, landing, or hover. Well, I think return to home is probably the most sensible of those three options. Let's click down here. Visual navigation settings. Enable obstacle avoidance. Absolutely no reason to leave it off. Enable horizontal obstacle avoidance in tap fly. If activated, aircraft will automatically fly around the detected obstacles in tap fly. Well, that seems sensible. Does that mean go round as opposed to go up and over? We don't use tap fly, but I'm assuming that means go round as opposed to go up and over. The only issue with that, I guess, is that if the obstacle is a wall that goes a mile in one direction, it's going to keep going sideways and sideways and sideways. So you can maybe make a judgment for your shot in that respect as to whether you need horizontal obstacle avoidance or vertical obstacle avoidance. Enable backward flying. That seems like a useful thing. Enable obstacle avoidance in active track. Yeah, you know, active track is great because the drone flies around your subject actively without you having to manage the control input. But it does have the downfall that you've got the drone flying backwards, flying sideways, and the obstacle avoidance traditionally might not catch some of the obstacles that could come into its way. So as long as you've got good sight on the drone, you can make a judgment as to whether you want the obstacle avoidance activated or not. Display the radar chart. Well, let's come out of that. I've just switched it off so we don't see the radar chart anymore. Let's go back into that and switch the radar chart back on. And there's the radar chart back on. Those yellow and red lines. Let's get back into these options. Advanced settings. Enable vision positioning. Absolutely, no reason to switch that off. You want the downward positioning should you lose your GPS. Landing protection. Aircraft will check the landing area when landing protection is enabled. That sounds great. And return to home obstacle check. Do you want the obstacle check in action when the drone is returning to home? Well, yes, you do. It's a nice fail-safe for if you haven't set the return to home altitude high enough. So that sounds quite cool. Let's go into the controller settings. You can play around with remote controller calibration should you need it. You can change the settings of your sticks. You don't really need to be doing that. And you can change what function buttons serve what purpose, which I think is very useful. We're going to try and customize our controller so we can more quickly access certain modes that we use more often than not. Quite cool. Wi-Fi settings, channel control mode. Okay, I suspect this is if you're using Wi-Fi to control your drone, which you might be if you're controlling it from your mobile device. We're not mad keen on that idea since we have a controller anyway with this nice sticks, so I think we'll stick with that. Battery, very useful. You can check the 3 cells and the health of your battery there and the temperature of your battery and set your low warning battery signal. We've set it down to 20%. from 30% because the 30% kicks in very fast. I would say the battery life in this is maybe one of the more disappointing things. If you look at our first impressions video, you really don't get much flight time out of it, so don't take the low battery warning for granted. Gimbal settings, we're going to do a video on this, absolutely crucial stuff for having nice smooth cinematic moves. Gimbal mode, follow mode or FPV mode. Well, for the purposes of filming aerial cinema, you need it on follow mode, but you could have some fun with FPV as well. Advanced settings, this is where the magic happens. You can get a quick look at our first impressions of the right gimbal settings there with the advanced settings, but we're going to dig into that in a little bit more detail also. Right, final page of settings, general settings, measurement unit. Imperial or 2 versions of metric, you can make up your choice on that. Select a live streaming select live broadcast platform for your live streaming. That's quite cool. You can stream straight to YouTube. If you want to take the risk of messing up on air and crashing your drone on air, you can do that. Cache the map in the background. Really cool setting, records your flight and records all your map data so you can go back and look at it. You can see the flight you took, you can see the input on the sticks. It's really amazing, check that out. Unlocking list. I don't know what unlocking list is actually. So if anyone wants to tell me what unlocking list is, you can leave that information in the comments, please. Video cache during video shooting. Now, strictly speaking, that's not necessary because that's going to take up a huge amount of data on your phone or iPad, but you can leave that on as well if you wish. As before, maximum available usage of your hard drive, 2 gigabytes. That's plenty given that we have quite old devices that don't have huge amounts of storage. Clear that cache automatically, probably a useful thing to do so that it starts to delete the cache as and when you reach the maximum that you just set above. Record audio with video cache. Not sure why you would ever record audio with a drone, I have to say. Device name, whatever, that's what you set when you set up the app. Swiping for full screen, you can have a single or double finger mode, and in the about settings, you see the version of the various bits of firmware that you have in the FlySafe database and such like. Here we're running the latest firmware 4.2.4. As you can see, some things are pretty much the same as all the other DJI drones, some things are a little bit different. So we've maybe highlighted a couple of the limitations, particularly the color modes, the lack of course lock, lack of waypoints actually as well, I should add. There's no waypoints on there, despite the fact that when I checked the specification on the DJI website, it said that you did have waypoints. So these things are kind of changing all the time. And if you do have that issue of not having your frame rates that you want and it's only showing 30p or something just looks a bit weird, update the firmware on the drone itself and save yourself a lot of hassle. Okay, we're done with that. As always, we are more a filmmaking channel as opposed to a gear channel, so don't forget to check out all our old videos to really get you from here to here and get you flying like a filmmaker with these bits of kit. It's really what you do with it that counts, and this is, based on our first impressions, a fantastic piece of kit. We're going to do some really thorough tests and get back to you with a proper review, a proper analysis of the picture quality and the control settings. So until then, we'll see you next time on Drone Film Guide.